5,000 years ago, on a modest rise beside the River Boyne, someone made a choice that still feels quietly defiant. They chose inward over upward, restraint over display, patience over permanence. It was not dramatic, not efficient, and certainly not designed to impress anyone standing far away. That decision became Newgrange. At first glance, it barely registers. A rounded hill settles into the landscape as if it has always belonged there. Grass holds the slope. Sheep wander across it with complete indifference. The sky passes overhead without pause. Nothing points, nothing announces. Newgrange does not compete with its surroundings because competition was never part of the plan. In a world that often equates importance with visibility, this is an odd beginning. Newgrange does not rise like a tower or spread like a wall. It gathers itself inward, concealing its effort behind earth and stone. The work is hidden, not because it was secret, but because it was never meant to perform. Its builders did not need witnesses. They needed time. Late-night history usually invites mystery at this stage. Whispered rituals, lost hierarchies, figures moving through shadow. But Newgrange refuses to cooperate with that expectation. It offers no names, no symbols that demand belief, no instructions for reverence. What it provides instead is something far less theatrical and far more durable. Alignment. Once each year during the winter solstice, light enters the monument, not as a flood, not as a spectacle, just enough. A thin blade of brightness travels down the passage and reaches the chamber at the center. It lasts for minutes, then disappears. No encore, no adjustment. The rest of the year, Newgrange remains dark, complete, and unconcerned. This is not a monument that rewards constant attention. It does not respond to curiosity by offering more. It responds by staying exactly the same. Modern impatience often mistakes this steadiness for mystery, simply because it no longer recognizes restraint as a form of intelligence. Newgrange does not explain itself. It does not defend its choices. It does not clarify its purpose. It waits, confident that understanding does not require noise. Tonight, that is enough. The hill remains quiet. Time loosens its grip. And the story begins by doing the least impressive thing possible, staying still. Nothing more is required, and that quiet acceptance gently prepares the listener to rest without resistance, explanation, or hurry tonight at the end. Before stone learned to behave. Long before Newgrange became a structure worth naming, it was simply a place that worked. A bend in the River Boyne offered water that arrived on time. The surrounding land responded predictably to effort. Soil accepted seed, rain followed patterns, and animals behaved with enough consistency to be relied upon. This was not a landscape that inspired poetic abstraction. It inspired planning. People settled here not because it felt sacred, but because it functioned. Reliability was the first requirement, and this place met it without complaint. The people who lived along the Boyne were farmers, and farmers develop a particular relationship with reality. They do not romanticize uncertainty, they track it. Seasons were not symbolic cycles, but recurring obligations. Winter arrived whether invited or not. It demanded preparation, storage, restraint, and patience. Spring did not reward hope, it rewarded correct timing. A farmer who guessed was a hungry farmer. Over generations, this kind of thinking produces habits that favor consistency over creativity and memory over impulse. These people did not wake up one morning and decide to build something impressive. That kind of thinking belongs to societies with surplus time and surplus explanation. Here, decisions unfolded slowly, shaped by repeated observation. When winter returned year after year, it did so with small variations that mattered deeply. Light shortened, cold deepened, food stores thinned. Waiting became a skill. Over time, these patterns embedded themselves not just in memory but in expectation. The future was not mysterious. It was scheduled. It is within this mindset that the first stones were gathered, not dramatically, not all at once. Stone appeared because it was there, because it endured, and because it could be trusted to remain when wood rotted and soil shifted. Farmers are drawn to materials that behave predictably under pressure. Stone does not argue. It does not forget its shape. It stays where it is placed, assuming it is placed correctly. This reliability mattered more than appearance. Thousands of tons of stone did not arrive through enthusiasm. They arrived through repetition. One stone moved, then another, then another. Each action small enough to repeat without exhaustion, yet significant enough to accumulate meaning over time. No generation completed the work alone. That would have been impossible and unnecessary. This was planning stretched across lifetimes, not because the people thought in abstract terms, but because they understood continuity as survival. It is tempting to imagine visionary leaders directing this effort, charismatic figures with grand designs. But farming cultures rarely function that way. Authority emerges through experience, not proclamation. Knowledge belongs to those who have survived long enough to be listened to. Decisions are conservative by necessity. If something works, it is repeated. If it fails, it is abandoned quickly. Newgrange did not emerge from imagination. It emerged from testing what could be relied upon. Before stone learned to behave as architecture, it behaved as boundary, as weight, as tool. People learned how it cracked, how it shifted under pressure, how much effort it demanded before refusing further cooperation. These lessons were learned physically, through hands and backs and time. There was no need to theorize. Stone taught by resisting incorrect handling and rewarding careful placement. This relationship preceded design. As seasons passed, patterns sharpened. Light became a resource to be measured, not admired. The length of days mattered because it determined work, rest, and risk. Winter light was not comforting. It was scarce. Its return marked relief, not because it was beautiful, but because it allowed labor to resume. Over years, attention to light became habitual. People noticed where shadows lingered longest, where frost arrived first, where the sun touched the land reluctantly before withdrawing again. This attention did not immediately produce monuments. It produced timing. Farmers learned when to act and when to wait. Waiting was not passive, it was strategic. Food stores were not consumed early. Seed was not planted too soon. Energy was conserved because waste had consequences. In this context, restraint became a form of intelligence. Doing nothing at the right moment mattered as much as doing something. Newgrange began within this restraint, not as a monument, but as an accumulation of decisions that made sense individually. Stones were gathered because they would last. Space was shaped inward because shelter mattered. Orientation mattered because light mattered. None of this required belief. It required memory. Memory carried through stories. Told at night, through gestures repeated during work, through shared understanding that did not need explanation. The humor, if there is any, lies in how unimpressed these people would likely be with modern speculation. They were not attempting to encode mystery. They were solving a problem. Winter returned every year. Light disappeared. Waiting became dangerous. So they measured it, not with instruments, but with stone and patience. They did not need to explain why this mattered. Hunger explained it sufficiently. Stone learned to behave because people learned how to treat it. Not forcefully, but consistently. Over time, behavior emerges from repetition. This applies to animals, land, and materials alike. Newgrange is not evidence of sudden brilliance. It is evidence of endurance, of people who paid attention long enough to notice that certain alignments did not change, even as everything else did. Before chambers, before passages, before carefully placed courts, there was familiarity with land, with cold, with waiting, with the knowledge that survival favored those who remembered more than they imagined. In this sense, Newgrange was inevitable, not miraculous. It was the natural outcome of people who trusted patterns more than inspiration. In late-night history, this is where the pace slows deliberately. There is no reveal yet, no spectacle, only groundwork, stones lying where they were set, people returning to fields, light shortening, cold approaching, everything behaving exactly as expected. And in that predictability, something unusual begins to take shape quietly, without announcement. Stone has not yet become architecture. It is still material, still heavy, still obedient only when handled correctly, but the conditions are in place. Memory has been tested, patience has been refined, time has proven reliable. Nothing dramatic is required. The work will continue because it makes sense to continue. Before stone learned to behave as monument, people learned how to behave around stone, calmly, repeatedly, without hurry. And that, more than any blueprint, is where Newgrange truly begins. Building without hurrying. Newgrange was not built quickly because speed would have been an irrational choice. Nothing about the environment, the materials, or the lives of the people involved rewarded haste. Stone did not appear where it was needed. It had to be found, selected, extracted, and moved from distances that would have discouraged any plan built on urgency. Some stone came from riverbeds, shaped already by water and time. Other stone traveled from coastal areas, carried inland without wheels, without metal tools, and without any expectation that the work would be completed within a single lifetime. This was not inefficiency. It was realism. The people who built Newgrange understood something modern systems often forget. Speed only makes sense when replacement is easy. Here, replacement was not easy. A cracked stone was not swapped out from storage. A misaligned slab could not be corrected by machinery. Every action carried weight, not metaphorically, but physically. When mistakes are costly, caution becomes the most efficient strategy available. Progress unfolded through repetition rather than milestones. A stone was placed, it was adjusted, it was left alone. Time passed. The stone either behaved as intended or revealed its flaws slowly. If it shifted, it was corrected. If it settled properly, it was trusted. This cycle repeated without anxiety. There was no deadline looming, no external pressure demanding completion. Newgrange is what happens when unfinished work is not treated as failure, but as a temporary condition. This approach allowed work to pause without consequence. A season could interrupt progress. A harvest could redirect labor. A generation could stop without guilt. confident that the work could resume later. The structure did not demand constant attention. It waited. Stone is good at waiting. People learned to be as well. In this environment, continuity mattered more than momentum. The project did not depend on a single leader or group maintaining energy. It depended on shared understanding carried quietly forward. Knowledge moved through observation and imitation, not instruction manuals. A younger person learned where to stand, how to brace, when to stop, simply by being present long enough. There was no need to explain why patience mattered. The stones explained it clearly enough. Modern imagination struggles here. We look for breakthroughs, moments of genius, sudden leaps of understanding. Newgrange offers none of these. There is no dramatic innovation to point to, no clever trick that solves everything at once. Instead, there is a long sequence of small, correct decisions made consistently. This frustrates narratives that depend on excitement, but it supports structures that last. The irony is gentle. A monument that has survived 5,000 years was built without any apparent concern for finishing quickly. Meanwhile, many things built rapidly today are already waiting to be repaired. Newgrange does not advertise its durability. It demonstrates it quietly, by still being here. Building without hurrying also meant accepting variation. Stones are not identical. Ground is not uniform. Weather does not cooperate on schedule. Instead of forcing uniformity, the builders adjusted. Each stone found its place through negotiation rather than command. If something did not fit perfectly, the surrounding structure adapted. This flexibility did not weaken the monument. It strengthened it by distributing stress rather than concentrating it. The absence of metal tools did not slow progress as much as one might expect. Stone tools, wood, rope, and human coordination are slower than machines, but they are precise when used patiently. Precision here did not mean exact symmetry, it meant stability. It meant understanding how weight traveled, how pressure accumulated, how slight changes affected balance. These lessons could not be rushed. They had to be learned slowly through repeated contact with the material. Time itself became a collaborator. Stones settled under their own weight. Earth compacted naturally. Minor adjustments happened without intervention. By allowing time to do some of the work, people reduced the amount of effort required from themselves. This was not laziness. It was efficiency measured on a longer scale. Newgrange does not reflect a culture obsessed with completion. It reflects a culture comfortable with continuation. Work did not need to end in order to be meaningful. It needed only to proceed correctly. This mindset removes panic from construction. Panic is expensive. Calm is economical. There is also quiet humor in imagining how unintimidating this process would appear to modern project managers. No schedules, no timelines, no visible urgency. Just people placing stones, stepping back, and trusting that future hands would know what to do. And they did. Building without hurrying allowed the structure to absorb knowledge over time. Each phase benefited from what came before. Mistakes were not catastrophic. They were instructive. Adjustments did not require demolition, they required patience. Over generations, this produced a monument that feels less designed and more settled, as though it belongs exactly where it stands. This approach also shaped social behavior. Cooperation mattered more than individual recognition. No single person could claim ownership of the result. The work belonged to continuity itself. This reduced pressure and allowed labor to integrate naturally into daily life. People worked when they could, rested when they needed, and returned without guilt. The structure did not demand sacrifice. It accepted contribution. In late-night history, this is where attention softens. There is nothing dramatic happening. Stones move slowly, hands adjust. Time passes. This is not a story of conquest or triumph. It is a story of restraint. Newgrange challenges the assumption that importance requires intensity. Its builders did not rush because they did not need to impress anyone quickly. They were not performing for an audience. They were solving a long-term problem with long-term methods. The result is a structure that feels calm even now, because it was never rushed into existence. If Newgrange teaches anything, it is that durability often comes from refusing to hurry. That continuity outperforms urgency. That unfinished work is not a crisis, but a stage. And that when enough people agree to move slowly together, something remarkably stable can emerge without ever raising its voice. Stone by stone, year by year, generation by generation, Newgrange became what it is without insisting on arrival. It simply continued, and that, quietly, made all the difference. The corridor that refused to be straight. At the center of Newgrange lies a stone corridor that seems almost deliberately uncooperative. It does not welcome the body easily, nor does it encourage confident movement. It narrows where shoulders expect space, lowers where posture prefers height, and quietly insists that anyone entering must slow down, bend, and pay attention. This is not theatrical difficulty, it is architectural instruction. The corridor does not exist to impress. It exists to function, and it functions best when approached with patience. The passage is long, narrow, and uneven by modern standards. It does not guide visitors gently inward with symmetry or visual comfort. Instead, it introduces resistance immediately. One must crouch, shuffle, and adjust. The body becomes aware of itself in ways modern buildings rarely encourage. There is no room for distraction. Movement becomes intentional. This physical inconvenience is not symbolic drama. It is a practical filter. Only those willing to proceed carefully can continue. The corridor slopes slightly upward as it moves inward. This incline is subtle enough that it often goes unnoticed, yet it plays a critical role. Water, as it turns out, does not respect symbolism. It follows gravity with dedication. By raising the interior chamber above the entrance, the builders ensured that rainwater and groundwater would drain outward rather than collect inside. This choice required observation rather than inspiration. Someone noticed where water gathered. Someone adjusted stone placement accordingly. The result is a passage that remains dry after millennia without seals, mortar, or modern drainage systems. Above the corridor, the corbelled roof performs its quiet work. Stone slabs lean inward gradually, each one transferring weight outward and downward, away from the open space below. There is no keystone, no single moment where collapse would occur if one piece failed. Instead, stability emerges through accumulation. Each stone depends on the others. Gravity is not challenged, it is consulted. The roof remains intact because it cooperates with weight rather than resisting it. Nothing about this design announces brilliance. There is no decorative flourish, no unnecessary curve, no dramatic alignment within the corridor itself. The stones are placed because they need to be there. Their shapes respond to load, not aesthetics. This absence of spectacle is precisely what makes the structure remarkable. Competence rarely demands applause. It prefers to remain unnoticed while doing its job reliably. The floor of the corridor is uneven, not because of neglect, but because perfection was unnecessary. Smoothness does not improve drainage. Uniformity does not strengthen structure. The builders focused on outcomes rather than appearances. Where a stone settled well, it stayed. Where adjustment was needed, it happened. This tolerance for variation reduced effort and increased resilience. The corridor adapts to small shifts rather than cracking under them. Movement through the passage is slow by necessity. This slowness alters perception. Time stretches. Breath becomes audible. The outside world recedes quickly, replaced by stone, shadow, and careful motion. The corridor does not rush the body. It restrains it. In doing so, it creates a transition not through symbolism, but through experience. You do not arrive suddenly at the chamber. You approach it gradually, aware of every step. This enforced awareness has practical benefits. A hurried person is more likely to stumble, damage stone, or lose orientation. The corridor prevents haste without signage or instruction. Its shape does the work. Architecture becomes behavior management. The structure teaches without speaking. The inward narrowing of the passage also contributes to structural stability. Narrow spaces are easier to roof with stone. Weight travels shorter distances. Forces concentrate where they can be controlled. Wide openings invite collapse. Narrow ones encourage endurance. This choice reflects an understanding of material limits rather than aesthetic preference. Light behaves differently inside the corridor. It diminishes steadily, not abruptly. The transition from daylight to shadow happens gradually, allowing eyes to adjust. This reduces disorientation and strain. Again, no symbolism is required. Comfort improves function. The builders may not have articulated this in words, but they understood it through experience. Modern visitors often describe the corridor as uncomfortable. This is accurate. Comfort was not a design priority. Survival was. Dryness mattered, stability mattered, longevity mattered. Comfort was optional. The corridor has lasted precisely because it does not cater to ease. The stones themselves show signs of selection rather than uniform sourcing. Shapes vary. Surfaces differ. This diversity allowed builders to choose stones that fit specific structural needs. Flat stones support roofs. Irregular ones lock into place. There is no evidence of forcing stone into uniformity. The structure adapts to the material rather than reshaping it aggressively. This approach extends to the chamber beyond the corridor. The passage does not announce arrival. It simply ends, allowing the space to reveal itself slowly. There is no sudden reveal engineered for drama. The transition feels earned, not staged. This restraint aligns with the rest of Newgrange. Nothing here seeks attention. Everything waits for recognition. In late-night history, this corridor becomes a lesson in restraint. It demonstrates how effective design often appears unimpressive. There is no mystery hidden here, only accumulated decisions made correctly. The corridor does not impress the intellect immediately. It convinces the body over time. The humor, if one looks closely, is subtle. Modern visitors, armed with expectations of ancient spectacle, are gently humbled by a passage that demands humility. Ducking is mandatory. Confidence must be adjusted. Stone remains indifferent. The corridor refuses to be straight, wide, or polite. It functions perfectly anyway. There is no need to attribute secret knowledge or lost science to this design. Everything required was observable. Water flows downward, stone carries weight, narrow spaces endure. The builders did not invent new principles. They listened carefully to existing ones. Over 5,000 years, the corridor has remained stable. This longevity is not accidental. It is the result of refusing unnecessary complexity. Straight lines crack, elaborate structures fail, simple forms persist. The corridor embodies this philosophy quietly. Each stone placed here reflects a decision not to overreach. The builders did not attempt to prove anything. They aimed to create something that would last. In doing so, they avoided drama entirely. And that avoidance is precisely why the structure still stands. The corridor asks for behavior rather than belief. It does not invite interpretation. It invites adjustment. Duck. Step carefully. Continue slowly. The message is physical, not symbolic. In sleep version storytelling, this passage slows the narrative naturally. Words shorten, movement narrows, attention focuses. The listener feels the corridor without needing explanation. Stone presses close. Time stretches. Nothing rushes. The corridor refused to be straight because straightness was unnecessary. It refused to be comfortable because comfort was irrelevant. It refused to be impressive because endurance does not require admiration. In the end, the corridor remains what it has always been, a narrow path that works. Not because it dazzles, but because it behaves. Stone stays dry, weight stays balanced. People slow down, gravity cooperates. Nothing here screams genius. Everything whispers competence. And competence, when given enough time, becomes indistinguishable from permanence. The winter solstice. Without the drama. Once each year, and only once, something very specific happens at Newgrange. On the morning of the winter solstice, sunlight reaches the entrance stone, slips through the narrow roof box above the passage, travels slowly along the corridor, and touches the back wall of the chamber. The light remains there for about 17 minutes. Then it leaves, not gradually fading into poetry, not lingering for reflection, just finishing its work and moving on. 17 minutes after roughly 5,000 years of repetition. This is the moment people tend to inflate. It is often described as mystical, ceremonial, cosmic, or transformative. Words accumulate quickly around it, as though silence cannot be trusted to stand on its own. But tonight, none of that is necessary. The event does not require mystery, it requires accuracy. And accuracy, unlike drama, is very patient. The alignment is precise, but precision does not automatically imply mysticism. It implies attention. Anyone who lives in the same place for generations relies on the land for survival and measures time through seasons rather than clocks will notice the sun's behavior. Farmers do this as part of their job. They notice when days shorten, when frost arrives earlier, when light behaves differently at certain points in the year. They notice because failure to notice has consequences. The winter solstice is not symbolic to people who must survive it. It is practical. It marks the longest night, the slow turning point where days stop shortening and begin, almost imperceptibly, to grow longer. For modern observers, this is an abstract astronomical fact. For Neolithic farmers, it was information. Information about cold, food storage, labor planning, and endurance. Watching the sky was not spiritual contemplation. It was seasonal literacy. At Newgrange, that literacy was expressed architecturally. The builders created a roof box positioned precisely above the entrance. This was not decorative, it was functional. The box allows low winter sunlight to enter the passage without flooding it year-round. The sun only reaches the chamber when it rises at its lowest angle on the horizon. On all other days, the light stops short. This did not happen by accident, but it also did not require divine instruction. It required observation, testing, correction, and time. Likely, the alignment was adjusted gradually. Stones repositioned, angles refined, a little too far left, a little too high. Try again next year. No urgency. If it took several generations to perfect, that was acceptable. The sun was not going anywhere. 17 minutes is an inconveniently short window. It does not allow crowds. It does not encourage spectacle. It barely rewards attention. You must be present, awake, and still. Miss it, and you wait another year. This alone suggests the event was not designed for frequent performance or mass participation. It is selective by nature, not by intention. Modern retellings often imagine a dramatic gathering, chants, ceremonies, or ecstatic observation, but the architecture itself argues against noise. The chamber is small, the passage is narrow, sound would echo uncomfortably. The space does not support crowds or performance, it supports stillness. The light arrives quietly. The stone receives it without reaction. The builders did not create a light show, they created a measurement. The solstice alignment functions like a calendar mark embedded in stone. It confirms that the year has reached its deepest point and begun to turn. Nothing more is required. The sun arrives, touches stone, and leaves. The information is delivered, interpretation is optional. The humor here is subtle but persistent. Modern observers are often astonished that ancient people noticed the sun's movement, as if daily exposure to the same sky over a lifetime somehow prevented pattern recognition, as if knowledge requires telescopes rather than patience. The shock says more about modern disconnection from seasonal cycles than about ancient ingenuity. The alignment does not predict eclipses or planetary positions. It does not calculate calendars decades ahead. It does one thing. Once a year, it confirms timing. That is all. And that restraint is precisely why it works. The roof box itself is an elegant solution to a simple problem. How do you let light in without letting water in? How do you admit sunlight at a specific angle while blocking it at others? The answer is not symbolism, it is geometry. The builders understood that the sun's path changes across the year. They shaped stone accordingly. Gravity and weather were considered. The box does not collapse. The passage remains dry. This required neither metal tools nor advanced mathematics. It required iteration. Observe, adjust, observe again. Over time, error decreases. Accuracy improves. The sun confirms success once a year. Feedback is slow but reliable. 17 minutes may feel anticlimactic. That is because it is not entertainment. It is confirmation. The builders were not creating an experience for future visitors. They were embedding knowledge into the landscape. The monument remembers something so people do not have to. In late-night history, this moment is allowed to remain small. The light arrives. Stone brightens slightly. Shadows shift. No revelation occurs. No transformation is required. The work has already been done. The chamber does not respond. It does not glow or resonate. It simply receives light and returns to darkness. This neutrality is important. The structure does not dramatize the event. It does not amplify emotion. It does not demand meaning. It records. For the people who built Newgrange, the solstice alignment likely held significance but not necessarily spectacle. It marked survival. It marked continuity. It marked the point where waiting could ease slightly. That does not require myth. It requires relief. The idea that something must be mysterious to be meaningful is a modern habit. Ancient people often accepted usefulness as sufficient. If something worked, it mattered. The alignment worked year after year. That was enough. The passage does not celebrate the sun, it measures it. The builders did not worship light, they tracked it. The difference is subtle but critical. Tracking does not require belief. It requires consistency. 5,000 years later, the alignment still functions. That longevity is not the result of ritual. It is the result of correct angles, durable stone, and respect for environmental forces. The sun has not changed its behavior. The monument has not changed its shape. The agreement holds. In sleep version storytelling, this is where the narrative becomes almost still. Nothing advances. Nothing escalates. The light arrives, then leaves. The listener is not asked to interpret, only to observe. The 17 minutes pass quietly. Stone warms slightly, then cools. The chamber returns to shadow. The year continues. This moment does not announce itself. It does not explain itself. It does not require reaction. It simply occurs, as it has for thousands of winters. The builders trusted that observation was enough. They did not need applause from the future. They needed reliability in the present. The alignment provided that. The winter solstice at Newgrange is not a miracle. It is a result of time spent watching, adjusting, and waiting. No mystery is necessary. The sun behaves predictably. Stone holds its shape. People noticed. And that perhaps is the most unsettling part. Not that ancient people achieved something extraordinary, but that they achieved it without noise, without urgency, without explanation. 17 minutes of light. Then darkness. After 5,000 years. Nothing more happens. Nothing needs to. What Newgrange does not tell us. Newgrange is remarkably quiet about itself. It does not explain why it was built. It does not clarify who, specifically, made the decisions that shaped it. It offers no inscriptions, no legends carved into stone, no instructions for interpretation. There are markings, spirals, arcs, repeated lines, shapes that suggest motion without committing to meaning. But none of them behave like language. They do not resolve into sentences. They do not point clearly in one direction. They remain stubbornly decorative without being explanatory. This silence is unsettling for modern audiences. We are trained to expect answers from the past, preferably labeled, categorized, and summarized. When confronted with an object that required immense coordination and effort, we instinctively assume it must also carry a message of equal scale. Something that large, we believe, should mean something large. Newgrange refuses this expectation. It offers presence without commentary, structure without explanation, endurance without narrative. The carvings, in particular, tend to attract confident speculation. Spirals invite cosmology. Repetition suggests cycles. Lines become calendars. Stones turn into symbols waiting to be decoded. Entire belief systems have been projected onto these shapes, often with great enthusiasm and very little restraint. Yet none of these interpretations can be verified. The markings do not correspond cleanly to known scripts. They do not map reliably onto astronomical events beyond what the structure itself already demonstrates. They resist translation. This resistance may be the point, though not in the way mystery narratives often suggest. The absence of explanation does not automatically imply secrecy, ritual exclusivity, or hidden knowledge. It may simply reflect a different relationship to meaning. The builders of Newgrange lived in a world where knowledge was embodied, practiced, and shared through repetition rather than recorded through text. Not everything needed to be written down to be understood. Some things were known because they were done. Modern discomfort arises when objects survive longer than their explanations. We assume that meaning must accompany endurance, as though survival without interpretation is incomplete. But history does not operate on modern expectations. Many things last because they are well made, not because they are symbolic. Newgrange may be one of these things. It survived because it was constructed carefully, maintained implicitly by its environment, and respected enough not to be dismantled, meaning, if it existed, may not have been designed to outlast the people who shared it. This challenges a common assumption, that ancient builders intended to communicate with the distant future. There is no evidence that they did. They were likely concerned with their own continuity, not with being understood thousands of years later by strangers carrying notebooks and expectations. The idea that every monument is a message to the future is a modern projection, rooted in a culture obsessed with documentation and legacy. Newgrange does not behave like a statement, it behaves like a solution. It addresses problems of time, season, shelter, and durability. It marks a moment in the solar year. It remains dry inside. It stands without collapse. These are practical achievements. If symbolism accompanied them, it was secondary, layered onto function rather than replacing it. The restraint Newgrange offers is not passive. It actively withholds. It refuses to resolve curiosity. This refusal frustrates interpretation because it denies closure. There is no final explanation to reach, no single insight that unlocks the whole structure. Instead, there is an accumulation of observations that never quite coalesce into certainty. This is where light irony enters. Modern culture, armed with advanced tools and vast information, often struggles more with uncertainty than Neolithic builders likely did. We are uncomfortable leaving questions open. We rush to fill gaps with theories, diagrams, and confident narration. Newgrange remains unimpressed by this effort. It does not respond to interpretation. It does not confirm or deny. It simply exists. The spirals carved into stone are often cited as evidence of symbolic intent. They are visually compelling, repetitive, and clearly deliberate. But deliberate does not equal declarative. A pattern can be meaningful without being linguistic. It can reflect habit, preference, or aesthetic coherence rather than coded information. The assumption that every repeated shape must represent something beyond itself is another modern habit. There is also the possibility that meaning was never fixed. The same carving may have meant different things to different people across generations. It may have shifted in significance as context changed. If that is the case, then seeking a single authoritative interpretation is misguided. The markings may not be a message frozen in time, but a surface upon which meaning was repeatedly projected and revised. What Newgrange does not tell us, then, is how to think about it. It does not guide interpretation. It does not reward certainty. It does not offer validation for confident theories. This absence forces a slower approach. Observation replaces explanation. Description replaces conclusion. In late-night history, this restraint is not treated as a flaw. It is treated as a feature. The inability to know everything creates space for calm attention rather than frantic speculation. The monument becomes something to sit with rather than solve. The lack of explicit narrative also protects Newgrange from becoming propaganda. It does not glorify individuals. It does not announce power. It does not commemorate conquest or lineage. There are no names preserved, no achievements claimed. This anonymity is unusual by later historical standards, where monuments often exist to declare authority or memory. Newgrange declares nothing. This suggests that the builders did not prioritize being remembered as individuals. Their concern was continuity, not recognition. The structure functions regardless of who is acknowledged for building it. This is an uncomfortable idea for modern cultures that equate legacy with identity. Newgrange survives without authorship. The monument also does not tell us what daily life looked like beyond its immediate function. It does not describe farming practices, social hierarchies, or conflict. It does not preserve voices. It preserves effort. The labor embedded in its stones is evident, but the stories behind that labor are not. This absence often leads to romanticization. In the vacuum of information, imagination rushes in. Priests appear, rituals multiply. Complex belief systems are reconstructed from minimal evidence. These reconstructions say more about the present than the past. They reveal modern discomfort with silence and ambiguity. Newgrange resists this by remaining materially specific. Stones weigh what they weigh. Angles align as measured. Light enters when it does. These facts are stable. They do not expand into mythology unless pushed. The monument itself remains grounded. What it does not tell us, perhaps most importantly, is why it still matters. It does not argue for relevance. It does not demand preservation through emotional appeal. Its endurance is indifferent to attention. This indifference can feel unsettling. We are accustomed to objects that perform meaning actively. Newgrange does not perform. Instead, it asks something quieter of the observer: patience. The same patience that built it is required to encounter it without forcing interpretation. This is not a test. It is an invitation to slow down. Not everything that survives is a message. Some things are simply the result of doing something carefully for a very long time. Newgrange may belong to this category. Its silence does not diminish it. It defines it. In sleep version storytelling, this realization allows the narrative to soften. There is no need to resolve ambiguity before rest. The monument does not explain itself, and neither must we. The absence of answers becomes a kind of calm. Newgrange does not tell us what to believe. It does not instruct. It does not persuade. It remains still, letting interpretation come and go without reaction. This refusal to engage is not defensive. It is confident. 5,000 years later, the stones remain unmoved by debate. The spirals do not clarify themselves. The passage continues to slope gently upward. Light enters when it should and leaves when it must. Nothing adjusts to modern expectation. And perhaps that is the most honest thing Newgrange offers. Not revelation, but endurance. Not explanation, but stability. It stands as evidence that careful work can outlast meaning and that silence, when constructed properly, can be one of the most enduring achievements of all. Monument that outlived its purpose. Whatever Newgrange was originally for, it stopped being that fairly early in its life. This statement often surprises people, as if usefulness were meant to be permanent or intention guaranteed relevance forever. But this is not failure. It is not neglect. It is simply how time behaves when it is allowed to continue uninterrupted. Tools change, needs shift, societies rearrange themselves. Stone, however, remains unimpressed by these adjustments. Newgrange was not designed to adapt. It was designed to endure. Those are not the same goal. Adaptation requires flexibility, modification, and frequent intervention. Endurance requires restraint. It requires choosing forms, materials, and structures that can survive being ignored. In this sense, Newgrange is not remarkable because it remained important. It is remarkable because it remained standing when importance moved elsewhere. At some point, the people who built Newgrange stopped using it for whatever specific purpose originally justified the effort. The winter solstice alignment may have lost relevance. Social structures may have changed. Generations passed and attention shifted toward new concerns closer to daily survival. Farming patterns adjusted. Settlements moved. Priorities narrowed. None of this required Newgrange to be destroyed. It simply required it to be left alone. Modern thinking tends to treat abandonment as loss. We assume that when something is no longer actively used, it has failed in some essential way. But archaeological landscapes are full of structures that quietly transitioned from function to presence. They were not dismantled. They were not repurposed. They were simply allowed to exist without demand. Newgrange appears to have entered this phase very early. This is where endurance becomes more interesting than intention. Many buildings collapse because they rely on maintenance. Roofs rot. Walls shift. Foundations erode. These failures are not dramatic. They are gradual. Newgrange avoided them by design, not by accident. Its corbelled roof sheds water without assistance. Its stone mass resists weathering through sheer weight and balance. Its passage slopes to manage moisture naturally. Stone does not require attention if it has been placed with patience and foresight. The irony is subtle but persistent. Structures meant to impress often disappear first. They depend on continued relevance, labor, and repair. Structures meant simply to exist often last longer. Newgrange was not designed for convenience. It was not designed for flexibility. It was designed to behave predictably under neglect. That choice proved effective. At some stage, Newgrange likely became part of the background. It was there, but it was no longer central. People passed it. Children played near it. Animals grazed on it. It became landscape rather than landmark. This transition does not diminish its significance. It confirms its success. The monument stopped asking anything of the people around it, and in return, it was left untouched. Later cultures encountered Newgrange without context. They did not know who built it or why. This did not prompt immediate destruction. Instead, it prompted caution. The monument was too large to ignore, too solid to remove easily, and too old to understand confidently. When uncertainty is paired with inconvenience, preservation often follows unintentionally. Newgrange endured because it did not interfere. It did not block roads. It did not demand resources. It did not collapse into debris that required clearing. It occupied its hill quietly and accepted weather without protest. Over centuries, this neutrality became its greatest protection. There is a tendency to romanticize this endurance, to treat it as evidence of sacredness or fear. But fear is not required to explain survival. Practical restraint works just as well. People avoid dismantling massive stone structures because it is difficult and unnecessary. Leaving them alone is easier. Newgrange benefited from this logic repeatedly. As time passed, its purpose faded completely from memory. Stories may have circulated briefly, then thinned, then disappeared. Oral traditions change. They adapt, they simplify. Eventually, they stop mentioning things that no longer affect daily life. Newgrange slipped into this silence smoothly. It did not resist being forgotten. It allowed forgetting to happen. This forgetting is often framed as tragedy, lost meaning, lost knowledge. But forgetting is not inherently destructive. It creates space. It allows objects to exist without obligation. Newgrange did not need to be understood to remain intact. In fact, misunderstanding may have helped. Without a clear function, no one felt confident enough to alter it. The monument's later rediscovery by antiquarians and archaeologists is sometimes framed as a return of purpose. But this is a new purpose imposed from outside. It is not the continuation of the original one. Newgrange did not wait to be understood again. It simply remained available for attention when attention eventually arrived. This distinction matters. Newgrange did not survive because people kept caring about it. It survived because it did not require care. Its builders solved problems that extended beyond their own time, not through prediction, but through construction choices that tolerated indifference. In this sense, Newgrange behaves more like infrastructure than ritual. Bridges that last are not the ones that are admired daily. They are the ones that continue functioning even when no one notices them. Newgrange functioned by remaining stable, not by remaining meaningful. There is a quiet humor in this. Modern societies build structures designed for rapid use and frequent replacement, then express surprise when they do not last. Newgrange was built without urgency, without expectation of reuse, and without flexibility. It remains. The monument also demonstrates a truth modern systems often avoid. Usefulness is temporary, but structure can be permanent. Newgrange did not fail when its original function ended. It simply changed categories, from tool to object, from process to presence, from active site to silent hill. This transition is not visible in the stone. There are no markers indicating when use stopped. No damage suggests abandonment. No repairs indicate decline. The change happened socially, not materially. Stone continued behaving as stone does. Time moved forward. Attention moved elsewhere. When archaeologists later entered Newgrange, they encountered a structure that had outlived not only its builders, but the very idea that built it. This creates discomfort. We prefer artifacts that explain themselves. Newgrange does not. It offers no apology for its silence. In late-night history, this silence is treated gently. There is no attempt to force meaning back into the monument. Instead, its endurance is allowed to stand as its own statement. Newgrange did not need purpose to remain relevant. It needed balance, weight, and time. The monument's continued existence challenges a common assumption that things must justify themselves continuously in order to persist. Newgrange contradicts this. It persisted because justification was unnecessary. It occupied space efficiently and did not demand revision. Eventually, it became something else entirely. Evidence. Not of belief, not of ritual, but of a way of building that anticipated absence. A way of constructing something that would not require explanation to survive. This is not dramatic. It is deeply practical. Newgrange is not mysterious because it hides something. It is quiet because nothing was hidden. Once its work was done, it stepped aside. In the end, Newgrange did not outlive its purpose by accident. It was built in such a way that purpose was optional. Stone behaved, gravity cooperated, weather was accounted for, neglect was tolerated. And so the monument remains. Not because it is still needed, but because it never needed to be needed. In sleep version telling, this realization settles softly. The idea that something can last without constant use, explanation, or maintenance is oddly calming. Newgrange does not rush. It does not adjust. It does not seek relevance. It rests. And in resting, it demonstrates a quiet lesson that modern life often forgets. Endurance does not come from constant activity. It comes from doing something carefully once and then letting time take care of the rest. Rediscovery and mild confusion. When Newgrange entered the modern imagination, it did not do so quietly. The monument had been sitting in the Irish landscape for thousands of years, successfully ignored by history for long stretches at a time, when suddenly it became interesting again. This transition was not smooth. Rediscovery rarely is. What followed was not immediate understanding, but a period of enthusiastic confusion that says more about modern habits than ancient ones. Early visitors did not arrive with restraint. They arrived with expectations. Newgrange was assumed to be symbolic before it was measured, mystical before it was mapped, and ceremonial before anyone bothered to ask whether those categories were even useful. This was not malicious. It was reflexive. When something old survives, modern audiences instinctively assume it must be dramatic. Silence feels insufficient. Stone must be hiding something. 19th century antiquarians were particularly inventive. Some described Newgrange as a temple, others proposed it as an altar, an observatory, a palace, or a druidic shrine, despite druids arriving several thousand years too late for the building to care. The monument did not correct them. It simply remained where it was, quietly absorbing speculation without comment. These interpretations were often confident and frequently incorrect. Stones were rearranged, passages were entered without documentation. Decorative elements were assigned meanings that changed depending on who was holding the notebook. Spirals became cosmic symbols one year, and fertility diagrams the next. Precision gave way to poetry. Accuracy waited patiently nearby. There is a particular charm to early misunderstandings. They reveal how quickly imagination fills gaps left by evidence. Faced with incomplete records, people do not default to uncertainty. They default to narrative. Newgrange became a canvas for projection. Every unanswered question invited a story, and stories arrived faster than measurements. Eventually, archaeology intervened. Not dramatically, not with confrontation. Archaeology does not shout. It arrives slowly with tape measures, notebooks, and an inconvenient preference for verification. Excavations were organized. Stratigraphy was examined. Construction layers were documented. The pace of interpretation slowed significantly, which is archaeology's primary contribution to human understanding. As data accumulated, the excitement softened. Radiocarbon dating established age without romance. Structural analysis explained why the roof did not collapse. Solar alignment was confirmed, but stripped of unnecessary spectacle. 17 minutes of winter solstice light remained impressive, but no longer miraculous. Observation replaced awe. This clarification disappointed some audiences. Mystery sells better than competence. A monument built patiently by farmers does not compete well with imagined priesthoods guarding cosmic secrets. But archaeology is not in competition. It is not concerned with entertainment. It is concerned with what can be supported without apology. The more Newgrange was studied, the less dramatic it became. And this was its true return to form. The monument had never asked to be impressive. It had asked to be stable. Modern confusion was a temporary inconvenience, not a revelation. One of the most persistent misunderstandings involved purpose. Visitors wanted a single answer. Was it a tomb, an observatory, a calendar, a ritual space? Archaeology responded with an unhelpful but accurate shrug. Possibly all, possibly none in the way modern categories define them. Ancient life did not separate function so cleanly. This ambiguity frustrated commentators but pleased researchers. It meant Newgrange could be understood contextually rather than symbolically. The monument became less about what it represented and more about how it was made, used, and then left alone. Excavations revealed human remains, but not enough to support the idea of a standard burial site. The alignment suggested careful observation of seasonal change, but not daily astronomical tracking. The carvings resisted translation into language. Each discovery narrowed speculation without eliminating uncertainty entirely. Importantly, archaeology did not replace mystery with certainty. It replaced fantasy with limits. There is a difference. Limits are calming. They tell you where to stop. Newgrange benefited from this restraint. Once the most extravagant interpretations were removed, the monument became quieter, more precise, and easier to sit with. Restoration efforts in the 20th century introduced their own mild confusion. Concrete reinforcements and reconstructed facades sparked debate about authenticity. Was Newgrange still Newgrange if modern materials helped hold it together? The monument, predictably, did not comment. These debates revealed a modern discomfort with intervention. We want preservation without participation, stability without touch. But Newgrange had always been touched. Stones were moved, grass was cleared, passages were entered. Modern involvement was simply another layer in a very long sequence of adjustments. Through careful documentation, archaeologists separated original construction from later modification. This transparency mattered. It allowed the monument to be seen as a process rather than a frozen moment. Newgrange had always changed. It just changed slowly. As research continued, public interpretation improved. Tours became quieter. Explanations became simpler. Guides spoke less about mystery and more about method. Visitors learned to crouch respectfully in the passage, not because it was sacred, but because stone demanded it. There is a subtle humor in how long it took modern audiences to accept this. We are comfortable with complexity in theory, but impatient with it in practice. Newgrange required patience to understand, the same quality required to build it. This parallel went largely unnoticed. Over time, the confusion faded into mild curiosity. The The monument settled into its role as an archaeological site rather than a speculative stage. Its age remained impressive, its construction remained precise, its silence remained intact. Late-night history prefers this version, not the one filled with dramatic claims and secret meanings, but the one where understanding arrives quietly, where certainty is partial, where evidence sets boundaries without demanding conclusions. Newgrange did not become less interesting when archaeology clarified it. It became less noisy, and noise is rarely helpful when the goal is rest. The monument now exists in a calmer mental space. It is known to be old, it is known to be deliberate, it is known to be patient. Beyond that, it is allowed to remain unresolved. This is not a flaw, it is an accurate reflection of the past. Rediscovery, in this case, did not restore meaning. It removed excess meaning. It allowed Newgrange to return to a state closer to what it had always been, a structure built carefully, left alone, and misunderstood briefly before being respected again. Mild confusion was a phase, not a destination. Clarification followed, and clarification, while less exciting, makes better company late at night. Stone does not benefit from exaggeration. It benefits from attention. Archaeology provided that attention slowly, methodically, and without flair. Newgrange endured this process as it endured everything else, quietly, without correction, without urgency. And in the end, rediscovery did not wake the monument. It simply noticed it. Why Newgrange feels unsettling. Newgrange is unsettling not because it hides something, but because it refuses to perform. It does not escalate. It does not guide attention toward a climax. It does not reward curiosity with revelation. It simply exists, finished and unconcerned, as though it has already outlived every question that could reasonably be asked of it. This calm persistence feels unusual to modern minds, trained to expect resolution. We are conditioned to believe that meaning should announce itself. Newgrange does not agree. Most structures invite interaction. Doors suggest entry. Towers imply height. Windows promise views. Newgrange offers none of these comforts. Its entrance is low, narrow, and inconvenient. Its interior is dark, restrained, and deliberately limited. It does not welcome crowds or reward lingering with spectacle. It tolerates presence without responding to it. This lack of reciprocity creates a quiet tension. The monument does not mirror the visitor's expectations, and that mismatch is deeply unsettling. In modern life, calm is often framed as temporary. Silence is assumed to be a pause before something happens. Stillness is interpreted as waiting. Newgrange contradicts this instinct. Its stillness is not preparatory. It is complete. There is no next phase implied by its posture. Nothing is building. Nothing is about to occur. The monument has already arrived at whatever conclusion it was meant to reach, and it does not feel obliged to share that conclusion with anyone passing through. This creates discomfort because it removes narrative control. Visitors cannot place Newgrange neatly into a story with a beginning, middle, and end. The building resists sequencing. It was built slowly. It functioned briefly or intermittently. It endured passively. These phases do not align with modern storytelling rhythms. There is no clear peak, no obvious purpose sustained across time, and no satisfying moment of decline. The monument simply persists. The unsettling quality intensifies when one realizes how little the monument requires from the present. It does not depend on maintenance to exist meaningfully. It does not rely on interpretation to justify itself. Even misunderstanding does not harm it. Newgrange remains structurally indifferent to attention. This indifference can feel personal, as though the monument is quietly declining participation in modern curiosity. There is also the matter of scale, not in height or size, but in duration. 5,000 years is a span difficult to hold comfortably in thought. It exceeds written memory. It ignores political eras. It absorbs cultural change without adaptation. Standing before Newgrange, one becomes aware of time not as a sequence of events, but as accumulation. This awareness has a flattening effect. Individual urgency begins to feel disproportionate. Newgrange does not rush because it does not need to. Its builders accepted that results could outlast them. This attitude is foreign to modern systems optimized for speed and turnover. The idea that a project could be started without expectation of personal completion feels almost irresponsible by contemporary standards. Yet the monument exists precisely because no one insisted on immediate payoff. This refusal to hurry creates unease. Speed reassures us that progress is happening. Slowness suggests loss of control. Newgrange embodies slowness so thoroughly that it undermines the assumption that urgency is necessary for achievement. It stands as evidence that restraint, repetition, and patience can produce outcomes more durable than efficiency ever could. There is a subtle irony here. Modern audiences often seek excitement in ancient sites, expecting danger, ritual intensity, or cosmic drama. Newgrange offers none of these. Instead, it presents agricultural intelligence, structural competence, and careful observation of natural cycles. The humor lies in the disappointment. People arrive hoping for secrets and leave with engineering. This disappointment is not loud. It is quiet and lingering. It produces a mild cognitive dissonance. How can something so old feel so emotionally restrained? How can a monument survive so long without demanding reverence or fear? Newgrange answers by not answering. It simply remains. The winter solstice alignment contributes to this unease. 17 minutes of light once a year is precise but anticlimactic. There is no extended display, no transformation. Light enters, touches stone, and leaves. The event feels almost accidental in its brevity. After 5,000 years, the monument offers less than half an hour of interaction annually. This economy of effect challenges modern expectations of return on investment. Even the carvings resist emotional escalation. Spirals repeat. Lines continue. Patterns do not resolve into messages. There is no clear beginning or end to the designs. They suggest motion without direction. This ambiguity denies interpretive closure. Meaning remains distributed rather than centralized. Newgrange also unsettles because it demonstrates comfort with incompleteness. Whatever its original purpose, that purpose did not need to remain active for the monument to retain value. Modern systems tend to collapse when their function expires. Newgrange did not. It transitioned into dormancy without decay. It allowed itself to become irrelevant without becoming destroyed. This challenges the modern fear of obsolescence. We equate usefulness with worth. Newgrange separates the two. It shows that something can outlive relevance and still matter simply by existing well. The monument's relationship with silence is perhaps the most unsettling element of all. Silence here is not absence, it is structure. The thick stone walls dampen sound. The narrow passage limits movement. The chamber absorbs presence without echo. Silence becomes a material property rather than a lack of activity. This physical quiet can feel oppressive to visitors, accustomed to constant stimulation. In late-night history, this is precisely where Newgrange belongs. It does not entertain, it settles. It invites the listener not to lean forward, but to ease back. The monument's calm becomes contagious. Discomfort softens into reflection. The need for answers fades. What remains unsettling is not fear, but humility. Newgrange reminds us that human achievement does not require spectacle. It requires alignment. With land, with materials, with time. And time, unlike interpretation, does not need to be convinced. The monument does not ask whether it is understood. It only demonstrates that understanding is optional. This quiet confidence can feel intimidating, not because it threatens, but because it does not care. In the end, Newgrange unsettles because it models an alternative relationship with time, one where urgency is unnecessary, where silence is sufficient, where completion does not need explanation. It stands calmly, knowing that interpretation will change again, and it will still be there when it does. Stone as memory. There are no names carved into Newgrange, no signatures pressed into stone, no record of who first lifted a slab, who planned the passage, or who decided where the light would fall. This absence is not accidental. It reflects a way of thinking in which memory did not belong to individuals, but to patterns of behavior repeated until they became reliable. Newgrange remembers how people worked, not who they were. It preserves action without ego, effort without authorship, and continuity without biography, which is unsettling precisely because modern culture is obsessed with attribution. Stone, in this context, functions as memory that does not speak. It does not explain itself. It does not highlight moments of innovation or personal brilliance. Instead, it records habits, the consistent stacking of stone, the repeated checking of angles, the decision to stop and wait rather than force progress. These choices are embedded physically in the structure. Every stone holds evidence of restraint. Every joint reflects patience. The monument is not a message written once, it is a sentence revised slowly over generations. Modern memory works differently. We catalog, we label, we archive aggressively, afraid that something will vanish if it is not named. Newgrange suggests the opposite. It implies that memory can survive best when it is not tied to individuals. When no one owns the work becomes easier to maintain. When no one claims authorship, responsibility becomes collective. This is memory without ego, and it feels unfamiliar because it denies personal legacy. The people who built Newgrange did not leave behind stories about themselves. They left behind evidence of cooperation. The stones remember that no one rushed. They remember that alignment mattered more than visibility. They remember that completion was less important than stability. These memories are not stored in symbols, but in proportions and tolerances. The corridor does not collapse because someone remembered how gravity behaves. The chamber remains dry because someone remembered how water moves. These are practical memories, not sentimental ones. Stone is particularly good at this kind of remembering. It does not exaggerate, it does not reinterpret, it holds shape. If something was done poorly, stone fails. If something was done carefully, stone endures. In this way, the monument filters history. Only successful behavior remains legible. Mistakes disappear without commentary. This creates an illusion of inevitability. Newgrange looks calm because everything frantic has already been erased. There is gentle humor in this. Modern visitors often ask what Newgrange meant. Stone responds by demonstrating what worked. Meaning becomes secondary to function. The monument does not remember beliefs. It remembers competence. This frustrates those seeking narrative, but comforts those willing to rest with evidence alone. The carvings reinforce this idea. Spirals repeat without explanation. Lines continue without conclusion. They do not commemorate events or people. They rehearse motion. They echo repetition. These marks are not declarations. They are reminders. They suggest that memory for these builders was not about preserving moments, but about reinforcing rhythms. This approach to memory requires trust. Trust that others will continue the work. Trust that knowledge will be passed through observation rather than instruction. Trust that forgetting names will not erase understanding. Such trust feels risky to modern minds, trained to document everything. Yet Newgrange exists precisely because documentation was unnecessary. The knowledge lived in hands and habits, not in text. Stone also forgets selectively. It does not remember emotion. It does not preserve excitement or fear. It does not record disagreement. What remains is the average of countless decisions. The calm that unsettles visitors is not proof that the builders felt calm. It is proof that calm choices survived. Over time, extremes were filtered out. Only balance remained. This filtering effect creates the impression of intentional serenity. In reality, serenity is simply what lasts longest. Panic leaves no stable architecture. Urgency erodes precision. Ego distorts proportion. Stone remembers what survives pressure, not what reacts to it. Newgrange, therefore, functions as a memory of process rather than purpose. Whatever the monument was originally used for matters less than how it was made. Use can expire, process endures. The builders may have stopped visiting. Meanings may have shifted. Stone remained because the method was sound. There is something deeply unsettling about this for cultures that prize innovation. Newgrange did not require novelty, it required consistency. It did not need breakthroughs, it needed repetition. Stone remembers repetition well. In late-night history, this kind of memory is heavy but calming. It removes the burden of interpretation. One does not need to solve Newgrange. One only needs to observe that people once chose patience over display, restraint over speed, and continuity over recognition. The monument holds that choice quietly. Stone as memory does not flatter us. It does not reassure us that we are special. It suggests that what matters is how reliably we behave when no one is watching. This is uncomfortable, but also clarifying. It implies that the most enduring legacy is not a name, but a method. Newgrange does not remember who built it. It remembers how. And that, after 5,000 years, seems sufficient. When a monument stops explaining itself. At a certain point, Newgrange stops cooperating with curiosity. Not abruptly, not defensively, and not with any sense of refusal. It simply grows quiet in a way that makes further questioning feel unnecessary rather than forbidden. Measurements have been taken, alignments confirmed. stone types cataloged, construction methods tested with careful hands and reasonable confidence. The corridor has been measured again and again. The chamber has been scanned, mapped, and compared. The light has been timed down to minutes. Nothing remains hidden behind locked doors or secret knowledge. And yet the monument does not become lighter once understood. It becomes heavier, not in mass, but in presence, as if certainty itself adds weight. This is the moment many listeners find unsettling, though they rarely name it as such. It is not fear, it is not confusion. It is the discomfort of realizing that explanation has limits, and that those limits have already been reached. Newgrange does not reward endless interpretation. It does not bloom into mythology the more one stares at it. Instead, it does something far less dramatic and far more difficult to accept. It stops explaining itself and waits for you to stop asking, as though curiosity, like construction, also has a natural point of rest. In modern life, we are trained to believe that meaning increases with analysis, that if we keep pulling at details, something larger will eventually reveal itself. More layers, more symbols, more hidden intention waiting patiently beneath the surface. Newgrange quietly disagrees. It offers a finite set of facts and then withdraws, as if to suggest that understanding has a natural boundary, and crossing it does not always lead somewhere useful. Sometimes it simply leads to repetition, where the same conclusions are reached again and again, only with louder voices. The people who built this place did not leave behind commentary. No instructions carved into stone, no declaration of purpose, no justification. This absence is not an oversight. It is a condition created by time itself. Newgrange does not argue for relevance. It does not defend its existence. It assumes endurance will handle that on its own. 5,000 years later, that assumption appears to have been reasonable. There is a subtle irony here. The monument survives precisely because it resists interpretation. It cannot be easily repurposed by later generations to support new narratives. It does not adapt to trends. It refuses to perform. While stories change, Newgrange remains structurally indifferent to them. It does not care which explanation is currently fashionable. It does not respond to enthusiasm or skepticism. Stone is remarkably democratic in that way. It treats all opinions with equal silence. Even the winter solstice alignment, often treated as the monument's defining feature, does not attempt to impress. 17 minutes of light enter the chamber, no more, no less. No announcement, no variation, no acknowledgement of applause. It happens whether anyone is watching or not. This is not spectacle, it is consistency. And consistency, when sustained over thousands of years, becomes quietly intimidating. Standing before Newgrange today, one realizes that the monument does not belong to the past in the way museums do. It belongs to duration. It exists in a category that ignores timelines and refuses to participate in urgency. It has outlived every explanation attached to it so far, and it will likely outlast the next ones as well. This is not arrogance. Stone does not possess ambition. It is simply very good at waiting. There is also something faintly humorous in this arrangement. Modern observers arrive armed with theories, equipment, diagrams, and enthusiasm, only to discover that the most honest response Newgrange offers is silence. Not mystery. Silence. The kind that follows once all useful information has already been delivered and nothing remains to be added without inventing something new. The monument does not correct speculation. It simply declines to participate. This silence can feel uncomfortable because it removes the sense of progress. There is no final revelation waiting just beyond the next study, no hidden chamber promising narrative closure. Newgrange does not escalate, it does not climax, it does not resolve. It simply remains, fully aware that it will still be here long after interpretations change again. In a world trained to expect payoff, this restraint feels unsettling. Yet this restraint is also deeply calming. It allows curiosity to rest without frustration. The monument has been measured. It has been understood as far as it needs to be. There is no test to pass, no answer to uncover, no conclusion to reach. What remains is presence. Stone arranged carefully, light arriving on schedule, time passing without commentary. There is a quiet lesson hidden in this arrangement, though it does not insist on being learned. Not that ancient people were wiser or more enlightened or secretly advanced beyond recognition, but that they understood when to stop talking, when to build something stable enough to speak for itself, and then step away. They did not surround their work with explanation. They trusted repetition, alignment, and material to carry meaning forward without assistance. Newgrange does not ask to be believed. It does not ask to be admired. It does not ask to be understood beyond what can be known with confidence. It simply continues to exist, confident that existence alone is sufficient. This confidence does not demand agreement. It does not compete for attention. It does not require validation. As this part of the story settles, the questions soften. Curiosity loosens its grip. The monument remains exactly where it has always been, unchanged by attention or neglect. And in that stillness, something rare becomes possible. Not knowing without discomfort. The need to interpret fades. The desire to resolve dissolves. The mind is allowed to rest in the presence of something complete enough to require nothing further. Stone rests. Light arrives on schedule. Time moves forward without explanation. And the night, satisfied with that arrangement, grows quieter still, leaving behind not an answer but a pause that feels unexpectedly complete. A hill that still knows the sun. Tonight, Newgrange does not ask you to understand it. It does not invite interpretation, analysis, or effort. It simply demonstrates with quiet confidence that understanding is not always the point. A low hill remains where it has always been. Stone rests exactly where careful hands placed it long ago. Light arrives when expected, stays briefly, and leaves without apology. Nothing argues for meaning. Nothing explains itself further. And somehow this feels complete. In late-night history, this is a rare gift. Most stories want attention. Most monuments compete for interpretation. Newgrange does neither. It does not raise its voice. It does not lean forward. It does not react when watched. It has learned that duration outperforms persuasion, and that patience does not require an audience to remain effective. 5,000 years of silence have made that lesson very convincing. There is a gentle irony in how modern minds respond to this calm. We arrive alert, curious, slightly restless, expecting revelation to happen if we stay focused long enough. But Newgrange responds by slowing us down instead. It refuses to escalate. It refuses to reward effort with spectacle. And in doing so, it quietly teaches something most places no longer do. How to stop asking without feeling like something was missed. The hill waits without posture. The stones do not adjust themselves for better angles. The passage remains narrow, mildly inconvenient, and entirely uninterested in comfort. Light follows its schedule, not ours. 17 minutes once a year, and then it leaves. No encore, no variation, no reminder. The monument has no anxiety about being forgotten because it has already survived forgetting many times over. And this is where the story softens enough to let sleep arrive, because sleep behaves very much like this place. It cannot be forced. It cannot be argued into existence. It arrives when conditions are right, stays as long as it needs to, and leaves without explanation. Trying to control it only delays it. Letting it come quietly works far better, a method refined through long practice. Newgrange has been practicing this rhythm for 5,000 years. It has waded through changing languages, shifting borders, collapsing explanations, and enthusiastic misunderstandings. It has endured neglect, excavation, admiration, and silence without altering its behavior. That consistency is not stubbornness. It is simply alignment. Stone placed well does not need to adjust itself to remain useful. So tonight, you are not asked to remember facts, alignments, or dates. You are invited to borrow a rhythm instead, a pace that does not hurry, a presence that does not explain, a confidence that does not perform. Let thoughts arrive like light in the passage, briefly illuminating something, then moving on without insistence. If sleep follows the same rules, arriving quietly, staying briefly, leaving without explanation, that seems perfectly reasonable. Newgrange would agree. It does not mind if you borrow its patience for the night.